Okay, so we're going to start the recording now. So this is, I'm going to go over the cost of higher education in the United States. So I thought it'd be helpful to have an agenda. So we've got about 35 slides or so, and I'm going to try to go through them relatively quickly, try to be done in 20 to 25 minutes, and then leave a little bit of time for any questions you might have. But if you have any questions along the way, feel free just to jump in and ask. So the agenda was to discuss how much have college cost prices increased and how do these price increases compare to other essential items, what's causing the cost price increases in higher education, and then what does it mean to be a nonprofit, and what can we do about this? And really that I'm going to save for another time because we've got plenty to talk about. Even though I do have some ideas, I want to focus on the assignment, which was to talk about cost of higher education. So if you look at the information that's published by the College Board and in other organizations, basically it boils down to that you're going to spend somewhere between $120,000 to $150,000 per child over a 4-year span. So for a lot of people, a lot of families, that's either somewhere between a big sacrifice to just not affordable. And so when we talk about the cost of education, it's not just the tuition and fees. It's also all these other incidental things like room and board, books, etc. So so it's a big responsibility. It's a big bite out of the family personal wealth and income, and so a lot of families end up really getting strained financially. And so this is just another slide that compares by type of institution the total cost. So you see, on average, the private institutions are approaching $40,000, and this was 2008, 2009. So by now they're probably over 40,000. But public schools are not inexpensive, right? So public four-year education, not far behind. And so either way, you're looking at somewhere between $120,000 to $150,000 for a 4-year education, and that's a big bite for families. And so when you look at the United States versus other countries, we're definitely among the leaders. In fact, there's only one country, based on this data, that it's more costly, and that's in Australia. So if you look at this, you can see that the countries that are in this darker maroon type color, Australia, United States, and United Kingdom, and we are among the world leaders in terms of cost of higher education. So and so that's a problem for us. So at the rate of growth and the current price is really starting to hurt our kids and our working families. Right. So studies have indicated, incredible studies, and this was really published by Bloomberg, that since 1978, tuition has increased by 1,120% in that 30-year time frame. And so when you look at that relatively to other things, what you see is that the tuition line is so much higher and so much more of a burden, right? So we can look at other things, even like medical care, which is also a large burden. But the thing about medical care is it tends to be more distributed in cost. But even that lags significantly behind higher education, and then the other items are significantly below that. So what we know is that we've had a period of rapid inflation in higher education, and it's at the point now that that people are starting to wonder, is it really worth it? So there was a poll done in 2014 by Pew Research, and the question was, is college affordable? And I don't think it's any surprise that 75% said no or disagree with the statement. The only question I have is, who were the 22% who didn't think it was? Because it clearly is it's a major strain for most families in the United States today. And so when we look at this in terms of relation to other items, so the blue line is the consumer price index, and the red line is the cost of higher education. What these two lines represent are the change year over year. So for example, in this year, the price increase was 10%. So you can see that the cost of higher education hovers between 4 and 10% increase a year. When you look at inflation, it's always less. Okay, so in and of itself, you may say, okay, not a big deal. But then when you lay these two things together in a cumulative effect, what you see is that here's the cost of the consumer price index down here, and here's the cost of education. So it's costing more and more for people to send their kids to school. So, and I think everyone's starting to feel that, and it's starting to become a bigger and bigger problem. And so, so here's just another look at that same issue in terms of different key items, apparels, electricity, food, medical care. So again, just to drive home that the price changes in higher education are so much more, and that we really they really do beg a lot of attention as to what is going on here, right? So just another chart on this. So the difference between these two charts is this compares 1980 to 2012, and this compares just the last 10 years. But you can see that the rate and the difference has been sustained. And so then when you compare these rate of changes to what's going on with the average income or the median income as tracked, you can see that the median income in the United States has been, there's been only marginal increases in some of the years. And in some years, during times of recession, it's actually gone down. And so, but higher education has continued to grow. And so we see this growing gap. We talk about income disparities, and we talk about the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer people's, and so one way to kind of break out of this, and to move up in terms of income and other economic circumstances is to get higher education. And unfortunately, the way higher education is pricing itself is becoming increasingly more difficult, or a bigger and bigger sacrifice for working families to make. So what part of what's going on then is we're seeing student debt is growing and growing and growing. And this was published by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Right? Here's all of consumer debt, and here's student loans. Student loans today are at $1 trillion in total. So except for mortgages, they outpace every other thing, and they're growing at a much faster rate than any other type of debt. So one way that families and students are getting into the higher education is mortgaging their future, at least temporarily, and in some cases maybe over a big chunk of their lives. And so so that's a choice that some people are making, but not everyone can afford that. And the thing is that, relatively speaking, what this chart talks to is that if you go back to the baby boom generation, and I can talk about myself. When I got out of graduate school, I basically was able to pay for it myself by working summers, working during the school year, and I essentially left school debt free, and that was not uncommon. Even 25, 30 years ago. But today that's just, it's highly unlikely that any student is going to be able to pay their way through college in a 4-year university. So relatively speaking, things have gotten much more difficult for our students and our working families to make this decision. And I think that had I been born and come into the work, had to make that decision, it would have been really difficult, for somebody from my circumstances to decide, am I going to take on that amount of student debt? And so it's a big decision. It's a very big decision. And if you make the wrong decision, take the wrong major, or for whatever reason the major you go down, all of a sudden the market changes, and then you're saddled with $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 worth of debt. It can be a lifetime. It could be a lifetime challenge. Let's put it that way. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions. So I'm not hearing anything, so I'm going to keep going. Hopefully I haven't lost anyone. I'm just going to check and make sure everyone's still here. Okay, so I see Carly, Deb, and Lori. So hopefully you can all hear me.
You're good, Frank.
Okay, thank you.
Good to go.
All right, thank you. So what's happened and what does it mean for the American dream? So when I talk about the American dream, I talk about the fact that, we have always thought that, our parents thought that we could do a little bit better than them, and we're hoping that our children will do a little bit better than us. And one way of doing that, and maybe the most common way, is through higher education. So I thought we could talk just slightly about economics. So if you look at, because I think this helps explain some of what's going on. If you look at the typical demand curve, there's something called negative feedback. And all negative feedback is very simply is that the higher the price, the less demanded. The lower the price, the more demanded. Okay, so that's simple, microeconomics 101, right? And so typically in competitive industries, competitive markets, what happens is that an equilibrium price is established, and that if prices go up a little bit, then the market forces correct it, and they kind of settle in on a particular price. But that's a competitive industry, and so with higher education, we're not seeing this type of dynamic. And so part of what's going on is that we're seeing a shift of demand. So what we know from economics is that if all things being equal, if there's an increase in demand, and there certainly has been a significant increase in demand in higher education, that at every given price point, more will be demanded. So in many industries, what happens though is that when that happens, more supply comes into the market, and then prices start to come down again. But we haven't seen that in higher education. So what's really happened is that despite the rising prices, demand continues to grow, right? So here's some data from 2001 through 2011 in terms of total number of applicants of four-year public and non-private institutions. Okay, we can see an increase from just under 50 million to slightly over 80 million in that 10-year time frame. So that's a dramatic increase in demand, despite the fact that prices are going up, right? And here's the enrollment rates from, this goes back a little bit further in time, but you can see that there's a steady increase in demand. So even as early as 1980, we were just over 10 million. Today, we're in the low 20 million in terms of fall enrollment in degree granting institutions. So what we see though then is that despite the increase in prices, we're seeing increase in demand. So the demand curve keeps being shifted to the right. And a big part of that is I think can be summarized by the fact that we know that one of the things that comes out of higher education is lower rates of unemployment and higher earnings. And so most of the data that's out there will tell us that on average, at least, people with bachelor's degree earn more than people with associate's degrees, and people with master's degrees earn more, and so forth. And we also know that there's lower rates of unemployment. So there has been a financial reward for many people to pursue higher education. And but it's obviously becoming a bigger and bigger decision. And if you choose, as I mentioned before, if you choose the wrong degree, it can be very difficult. So the other side of the equation, though, is the supply side of the equation. So, and I thought this was interesting when I started to look through things. So despite rising prices, okay, so demand continues to grow. But this is the admission rates at selected top universities. So what you see is that despite the fact that the prices are going up, they're able to be more selective, right? And that's because demand keeps going up. And at the same time, and I thought this curve was interesting too, what we see is that there was a growth until about 1990 in degree granting institutions in the United States. And then since then, over the last 20 odd years, it's been relatively flat, right? It's gone from 4,200 to 4,400. So the supply has really started to level off, right? And so here's another thing that says undergraduate enrollment at selected top U.S. institutions, right? So they've kind of capped, right? So by capping the space they have, what they've been able to do in turn is to be able to raise prices. and so as they raise their prices, other institutions are able to move their prices up as well. So I think a big part of this is explained by supply and demand, because in a typical market, as I mentioned, supply and demand works like this, that that we'll have, if prices go up, then more supply comes into the market. If more supply comes into the market, then prices come back down again, and so forth. But in this particular institution, we have more of what is called an oligopoly. So the demand keeps moving to the right, but the supply remains relatively constant. So prices keep going up and up. So I think from an economic perspective, we at least have some sense as to what's going on, right? Increasing demand, relatively stable supply overall. And that's led to the opportunity, the opportunity for institutions of higher education to raise their prices, and they have. Right? They've done so in a very aggressive manner. And so the next question I have, and Carly, not to disrupt you when you're on your vacation, but I just happened to come up with, find this: how much will you need to send your child to college in 2030? Right. So today, what we know is that you're going to spend somewhere between 120 to 150 at many four-year institutions. And the estimate, and this is by the U.S. government, is that number's probably going to be about $205,000 for a private four-year institution. So if you have three kids, you need to plan on spending about $600,000. And so, realistically, if you look at the median family in the United States, then that's probably not a realistic thing for them to think about. So that asks the question, what is it that is driving it? Okay, so why is higher education so expensive? So that's what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides. But before I do that, I have a video that I like, and so I'm going to play this video. It's only a 3-minute video, and I think he touches upon some things that that for the most part I agree with. So let me see if I can get this to work. I haven't tried this, so we'll see if it works. If it doesn't, then we'll just move on to the next slide.
My student debt will most likely, by the time I graduate, be around $80,000 at minimum.
It's really complicated. I just don't understand how we have to pay so much money to get an education, especially like in America.
It's overwhelming. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my major yet, so it's kind of crazy thinking about paying off all that debt, but somehow it'll disappear.
College is getting increasingly expensive. Tuition at U.S. universities has risen faster than inflation in every year since 1981. So why is the price of college rising so quickly? It's basic supply and demand. We're seeing enormous increases in the demand for higher education, and universities can respond in two ways: increasing the supply by accepting more students, or increasing the tuition. Since most colleges can't keep up by increasing enrollment, tuitions must rise. To understand what's happening, we need to examine what's been driving that demand. There are two main factors. First of all, the payoff from a college degree has been growing over time. In 1980, college graduates earned 50% more than high school graduates. In 2008, they earned over 90% more. In addition, a college degree increases your chances of finding a job, even in a sluggish economy. In the May 2012 employment report, the unemployment rate for high school graduates rose to 8.1%, while the unemployment rate for college graduates fell to 3.9%. So it should be no surprise then that young people today are pursuing higher education in larger numbers than ever before. But there's more to the story.
It's kind of something that I don't understand. Costs are constantly rising. I mean, I guess it has to do with, every price rises, every cost rises. But college costs rise so exponentially that I think that it just doesn't equate.
There's a second major reason for the increase in demand, and this one is the result of public policy. To make colleges more affordable, federal and state governments have been giving subsidies to students, most notably through government-backed student loans, but also through grants and tax credits. In fact, as prices rise, there's political pressure to increase these subsidies. What many students don't realize is these subsidies actually lead to higher tuitions. When you subsidize something, it's cheaper for people to consume. So people consume more of it, and demand rises. So while students may want more subsidies to make college more affordable, ironically, more subsidies actually make college less affordable because they fuel the demand that's driving tuitions upward. Instead of being helped by the subsidies, students are just taking on more debt than ever before. And this rising demand also drives up prices in another way. Because colleges have no trouble filling seats, even with record high tuitions, they felt no pressure to cut costs. Instead, colleges have spent more: fancy student centers, dining halls, athletic facilities, and many more administrative staff than ever before. These additions make college more expensive without increasing the value of the diploma. The rising price of college education is a heavy burden for young people and their families. Fortunately, because we know the main reasons behind rising tuitions, promises of higher wages and increased subsidies, we can start to look for solutions.
Okay, could you all hear that? See that? Can you guys still hear me?
I can
We
hear
were
it.
able to hear it, but not see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, don't worry.
All right, well, all right, so can you see the screen now? Why is higher education so expensive?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So that was done by the Learn Liberty organization. They publish a lot of public interest stuff, and some of which is good, some of which is just so-so. But so NPR also has spent some time looking at this cost, and they have a 30-minute audio that you could download if you're interested. But I just highlighted a few things here. So basically, what they're saying is that that every year it's going up, and so where does the money go? And basically, what they're saying, all sorts of things, including administrative and teaching costs, scholarships, sports teams, and 11 new construction projects. But basically, what they're saying is that professors are not the beneficiaries of large increase in college spending that's gone on. In fact, the percentage of all students taught by non-tenure has increased. Meanwhile, universities' administrations have grown, meaning colleges are now empowering more provost, deans, and assistant deans than ever before. And so you start to see this theme over and over again. Here's something from Forbes talking about why is tuition rising so quickly. So there's the demand function here. There's the marketing function, right? The colleges are basically, spend a lot of time and money trying to attract students, and so that's part of it. And then administrative spending. University spending on administrative per student has risen 61% in recent years, opposed to just 39% increase in instructional spending, and then decreased government aid. So that was Forbes. And then there's this Delta project. And basically, they come up with the same findings about this growth in administrative jobs. It's not about faculty salaries. In fact, faculty salaries are probably being reduced on average, or not salaries, but overall investment and more investment in these non-direct educational things. And so then I found this other study that was done by Richard Vedder. He's at the Center for College Affordability and Productivity. And I'm not going to put all 12 truths out here, but there were some things that resonated. College degrees do not mean success. And so basically what they're saying is that, if you look at different occupations as reported by the Department of Labor, you'll see that there are a large number of college graduates taking jobs that don't require a degree, and that obviously is concerning, right? And then a significant number of our students don't graduate on time, which obviously adds to the overall cost. And then we get into some other things that I think touch upon some larger issues. And this is the cultural issue about CEO pay and senior staff pay. What you see here is that college presidents, on average, how much more increase that they've gotten as opposed to the real per capita income. So senior staff and CEOs, college presidents are taking a larger and larger share of compensation. And and I think that's really a cultural thing in many of our institutions. But we would hope that in nonprofit organizations that we wouldn't quite see that. And then non-faculty growth has been used to be at 52 out of 100. Now it's up to 97 out of 100. And this is just a by the way, textbook costs have gone through the roof, right? And that's something we could actually do something about. So those are some of the core reasons. And so then I started to think about, well, what does it mean to be a nonprofit? So because most higher education, not all, obviously, are nonprofit institutions. And so if you look at this idea of nonprofit, basically it does not mean that you can't generate a profit or a surplus, but to get nonprofit tax exemption, you should be serving the public interest. So legally, a nonprofit organization, when does not declare a profit, instead should utilize all the revenues available after normal operating expenses. So can nonprofits make a profit? And the answer to that is yes. And if so, are there any limits? And the answer to that, as far as I can tell, is no.
No.
And should there be limits on profits and retained surpluses? And so the argument for doing that would be, if I don't have a limit on it, that means that I can continue to accumulate surpluses, I can continue to increase profitability, and who's paying for it? Well, in the case of higher education, it tends to be the students and the working family. So let me just show you there's an organization called GuideStar. So my background is finance and accounting, and so I came across this organization called GuideStar. They collect 990s. Anyone know what a 990 is? So I wouldn't expect you would, but a 990 are the financial statements that nonprofits are required to file every year with the Internal Revenue Service.
Oh, wow.
And so this is in the public domain. So I wanted to show you one nonprofit organization that's in higher education. And so let me tell you briefly what these numbers say. So here's 2008 going to 2012 is basically the total revenue, which primarily is tuition fees. Okay, there is some investment income here. It's gone from 118 million to 189 million. Now, this particular institution has about 6,000 students. And what you see here is that the profit, or what's called the net gain, 37 million, 34 million, 35 million, 63 million. As a percent of the revenue they're generating, 31%, it hovers in the low 30s. So what that means is that had this institution been charging its students at its cost, that the tuition fees hypothetically should be about 30% less than they are. So I'm not going to ask you to guess what institution that is, but I will show you that this is the fund balance. The fund balance of this particular institution was 198 million. And keep in mind that it's only got $190 million in revenue. It went from 198 million to 246 million, and today sits at $380 million. So it's got a tremendous fund balance. Wow. And the last slide I'll show you is, this caught my attention because Northeastern University, which is right down the street from us, well, you all know that. They were mentioned in the New York Times because the president of Northeastern, which when I was going to school was a commuter school, for working class people, very affordable. Their president is the second highest paid university president in the country at $3 million a year. So you can look and see that they are paying their senior staff
Wow.
very, very handsomely. And so that's everything that I had to share in terms of cost of higher education. So I'll open it up to any questions or discussion at this point.
Frank, on the nonprofit thing, what about a not-for-profit? What's the difference there?
I don't think there is any difference, Carly. I think they're one and the same thing.
My BU was a not-for-profit, and I know that they can kind of get away with a little bit. They have a little bit more latitude because they're a not-for-profit, but I don't exactly know what that means and if that would have any, bearing on the skyrocketing costs. But
no, it's in fact, I could pull the BU 990s, and I'll guarantee you that they look very similar to what I showed here.
oh yeah,
And so not profit or non-profit, I think they're synonymous. I don't think there's any difference in the terminology. They're all I believe they're all classified as 501Cs. So higher institutions of higher education. So this whole idea of non-profit really is, at least financially, is really a misnomer. So other questions, comments?
what do you foresee happening
Nicely
with
done.
loan debt crisis?
That's a good question. I don't know, and I think that at least in the short term, it's going to get worse, and I think that at some point, my optimism really comes from what I saw happen in the computer industry, which is a tremendous paradigm change, because the higher education industry is ripe for major change to make it. And I think with technology and with the increasing credibility of online education, that we're going to see, and it's hard to predict when, but I don't think it's going to be that far in the future. We're going to see large scale online education at affordable rates, and there's really no reason to do it, not to do it, because this is just not affordable for most families today. And but yet higher education is a pathway to have a decent standard of living in the United States. So
Frank, can you hear me?
yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize I don't think I was talking before, but it wasn't going through. I just have one last question. So these not-for-profit or nonprofit institutions, do they get a tax break or something like that? I mean, are there other?
Yeah. They don't pay taxes.
They don't pay any taxes.
They don't pay any federal income tax, nor do they pay any property tax. So all the property that you see, like on Longwood Avenue,
yes,
these are all nonprofits. They don't pay unless they have a voluntary agreement with the city. They pay no property taxes. They pay no federal income taxes on their surpluses. So that's their major advantage.
So then theoretically they would be offering lower tuition costs because their cost to run is less than somebody who is for profit. And did you find any stats on that kind of demonstrates that, or is it just one of those things that would be too hard, like comparing apples to oranges?
Actually, the only data I saw on for-profit schools was that their tuition is not increasing as quickly, and generally is a little bit less than the nonprofits.
Okay.
So there, I think it's certainly something that, if we had the political will, we would start to question, what is the point here? Why should an organization be generating this level of profitability, 33%? Because I don't know many companies that generate this level of profitability and be able to retain all that money. At the same time, you're charging students and families things they can't afford. How do you maintain a nonprofit status with that?
Agreed.
So. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. They're probably gonna shut us off in about 2 minutes anyway, because it's about 5:40, so.
Good job, Frank.
This
Thank
is
you.
great, Frank. Thank
You guys wanna see the
Very
baby?
enlightening.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, look at.
He's getting big.
Oh, yeah.
Carly, no wonder you're tired.
What's that?
I said, no wonder you're tired.
Oh my
Steady.
God. I'm way more overwhelmed than I thought I would be.
Yeah, he is a big boy. How many pounds is he now?
He's 3 weeks and he's probably somewhere over 10 pounds.
Okay, wow.
Nice.
He was 9/11 about 2 weeks ago. So
Gosh.
he's probably closer to 11 pounds, I would say.
Oh, he's beautiful.
He is beautiful.
Precious. Studying with mom.
Yeah. The other kids are, I can encourage them with a show for a half hour while I get stuff done. So
Sure.
There
All
you
right.
go.
I'll see you guys.
See you
Okay.
later, Carly.
Good
Take care.
job,
Talk to you
Frank.
soon.
Thank you. All
Way
right.
to set
Good,
the standard.
everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you,
Bye.
Frank, for
Okay.
helping
Way to
us
go,
being
Frank.
a pioneer.
Okay. You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.